How did officials at Giza keep thousands of workers from hunger when repeated shortages could weaken both the workforce and the pyramid rising above it? Tonight we will answer in a calm history made to help you sleep. How much grain had to arrive before labor began? Who turned it into food at scale? And what happened when a storehouse record and the supply in front of a worker did not agree? You may close your eyes whenever you wish, drift past a name or date, or let an entire chapter pass. Each part of the route will settle its own small question before the next handoff begins. The consequence is practical. Without recurring supply, workers could go hungry, and mills, hearths, crews, and the work they supported could lose a working cycle. No source in this story records a famine morning or project-wide stoppage at Giza. The first useful proof is a broken piece of clay from the administrative world of Fourth Dynasty Giza. On one face, a ceiling could carry an official impression. On the other, damp clay might retain a cord, contain a rim, woven surface, door, or document it once helped to close. Opening the closure broke the clay. The fragment can preserve an act of responsibility after the protected object and its contents have disappeared. It shows that access was controlled. It does not tell us whether the lost contents were grain, beer, another commodity, or a record, nor how much the container held. I'm Elias, guiding your imagination through hidden history. In the comments, leave a future journey, one thing I can improve, and upvote an idea you want next. Each episode takes many hours of research and editing. A like or subscription helps this small channel continue. If I choose your idea, I'll credit your name. Now, back to the guarded clay. We will move from this broken closure to the number of people behind it, then through a town, a river network, a storehouse, a bakery, an account, and an organized crew. Later, we will follow the quieter evidence left by vessels, animal bone, human bone, water, ash, and charred grain. The route is real, but no single ancient record joins all of its pieces into one complete morning. To keep the human work in view, we will sometimes walk beside a woman we will call Meret. She is not a person recovered from a papyrus, a tomb, a ceiling, or a payroll. She is an explicitly composite ration administrator, used only to connect tasks that the evidence supports, checking a closure, requesting a second count, reporting a mismatch, and releasing a verified batch. We will not give her a hidden biography or private dialogue. Her choices will remain visible, modest, and practical. Maret's pressure stays at the threshold. A longer check can leave a miller and hearth tender waiting, while an unsupported release pushes uncertainty into fuel and labor already committed. The ceiling has already opened one useful door. Feeding the pyramid workforce was not merely a matter of possessing food. Someone had to make access accountable even when the contents could later vanish from the record. Before we follow one representative container, however, we need to understand how many people waited somewhere beyond it and why that number cannot be treated as a known starting point. The Great Pyramid was the royal project of Khufu in Egypt's Fourth Dynasty, conventionally placed in the 26th century before the Common Era. Its scale invites a modern reflex. We want to know the head count, multiply it by a ration, and discover the daily supply in one neat line. Yet the first number in that calculation is missing. The most famous total comes from Herodotus, a Greek writer who described 100,000 people rotating every 3 months. His account matters because it shaped how later generations imagined the pyramid, but he wrote roughly 2,000 years after Khufu. He was not reading a payroll that archaeologists can now inspect. Modern estimates are closer to us, not necessarily closer to an ancient census. Some are public syntheses. Some begin with engineering assumptions. One frequently repeated figure entered the discussion as an input to a model of meat provisioning. Each number answers a slightly different modern question. The surviving evidence supports a less theatrical and more useful word: thousands. It also shows that those thousands were not one undifferentiated crowd standing on a ramp. A royal building project required people who quarried and transported stone, shaped tools, supervised crews, kept records, moved boats, handled animals, carried fuel, ground grain, tended fires, baked bread, maintained spaces, and supported households. Some labor may have been permanent and skilled. Some may have rotated through obligations organized by district or institution. Hierarchy was real. So was specialized knowledge in domestic life. That complexity is why the old picture of a single mass of enslaved workers is inadequate, but its opposite is inadequate too. Provisioning does not prove that everyone was a freely hired employee in the modern sense. Royal obligation, status, skill, dependence, and material support could exist together. The evidence asks us to set aside both simple extremes and notice the organization in between. Named royal crews give that organization a clearer outline. In Khufu's time, the logbooks of an inspector called Marer preserve one specialized crew carrying out royal work, including journeys connected with Giza. Other inscriptions from a later Giza project preserve named crew identities and subdivisions. Scholars use the Greek-derived term file for one kind of rotating subdivision. These records do not reveal the total workforce, but they show a large institution divided into groups small enough to name, assign, supervise, and supply. Now return to Maret at the representative threshold. She does not know an archaeologist's workforce estimate, and we should not place a census in her hands. Her task is narrower. A container or batch is expected. A closure is checked. Other workers are waiting for the next step. Fuel and labor have already been committed somewhere farther along the chain. She cannot feed an abstract population all at once, but she can keep one responsible handoff from becoming untraceable. This changes the grain question. We no longer need to imagine one official solving the entire pyramid's appetite at dawn. A system could divide the larger demand by place, crew, store, production unit, and work cycle. The missing headcount remains important because it prevents false tonnage and false certainty. Yet it does not prevent us from seeing repeated organization. The local answer is therefore quiet but firm. We do not know one exact number of miles, and we should not pretend that we do. We do know that a project involving thousands of differentiated people required tasks that could be repeated, checked, and passed onward. To see where those tasks gathered, we must descend from the pyramid's stone horizon toward the streets and compounds excavated below it. South of the Great Pyramid Field lies the settlement archaeologists call Hayt el Ghurab, the Wall of the Crow. Its planned spaces bring administration, housing, storage, craft, and food production into one broad working landscape. It is the strongest excavated place for understanding how Giza's pyramid building system supported people. It also carries the most important chronological caution in this story. Most of the town that can be dated securely belongs not to Khufu's Great Pyramid project, but to the following royal projects of Khafre and Menkaure. Earlier material may reach back into Khufu's time. That possibility makes the site relevant, but it does not turn every wall, jar, bakery, or bone into a record of one Great Pyramid workday. We will use the town as evidence for a Giza system that developed across the Fourth Dynasty, while Khufu's papyri remain a separate contemporary window. With that boundary in place, the plan becomes more interesting, not less. The excavated town was not one endless barracks block. Large residences stood in one area. Smaller houses and household activity appeared in another. Long gallery blocks may have accommodated organized groups or crews, although their exact capacity and exclusive function remain debated. Workshops and food production spaces worked beside administrative compounds. The crown supplied a planned framework, and ordinary life filled it unevenly. That unevenness matters for food. A manager in a large residence, a person attached to a gallery group, a craft worker, a baker, and a family in a smaller house did not necessarily receive, prepare, discard, or preserve the same things. Different neighborhoods leave different densities of pottery, plant remains, and animal bone. The archaeological map is therefore not a menu enlarged to town size. It is a record of varied activity filtered through varied disposal. The scale of modern botanical work makes the filter visible. An open research database records results from 2,376 archaeological features and 4,653 studied samples collected across years of excavation. Those numbers sound comprehensive, yet the principal plant record from these settlement contexts is charred. Grain or chaff that met fire could survive. Unburned food, basketry, fodder, and other plant material could disappear. Even thousands of samples remain a selective window. Clay survives differently. Thousands of ceiling fragments preserve the traffic of administration through the settlement. Some bear royal names or official titles. Some retain reverse impressions that help researchers understand what sort of surface was closed. Their abundance shows repeated acts of access and control, but the fragments do not restore every shipment. The town speaks most clearly when architecture, botanical remains, pottery, ceilings, and refuse are allowed to answer different questions. Meret's path through this place is therefore representative. We may place her between a receiving threshold, a protected store, and a production zone because all three kinds of work are supported. We may not claim that one excavated doorway was hers or that she walked this route during Khufu's reign. Her usefulness comes from showing responsibility moving through the system, not from pretending the town has yielded her name. The local answer is that Giza preserved an integrated support settlement, socially and functionally varied, across more than one pyramid building reign. It offers no single Great Pyramid kitchen ledger, but it shows the kinds of spaces in which recurring provisioning could be managed. And before anything could enter those spaces, fields, districts, animal herds, and transport crews beyond Giza had to place a load in motion. Let us follow that movement backward for a while, away from the storehouse and toward the wider country that made a royal project possible. The Giza plateau could not grow its own morning supply within its walls. Grain began as the work of communities beyond the construction zone, and royal provisioning turned that dispersed production into scheduled obligation. One of the clearest administrative windows survives far from Giza, at Wadi el-Jaf on the Red Sea. There, papyri from the end of Khufu's reign belonged to specialized royal teams using an intermittent port. Among them is a provision account known as Papyrus H. It follows one naval work gang for 4 months, recording commodities, dates, origins, and expected amounts. It is not a Great Pyramid kitchen ledger, and its figures cannot be multiplied into a Giza-wide ration. Its value lies in the behavior it preserves. The account shows 2 delta districts taking turns in the burden of supply, one for a period and then the other. Bread, flour, grain, and dates entered columns rather than appearing as an anonymous royal abundance. A place had responsibility. A date mattered. A dispatcher and recipient could compare what was expected with what arrived. Some short deliveries were carried forward as arrears, made visible with red marks. The cause of those deficits is lost, but the account shows that the shortfall did not have to vanish into memory. This is our first answer to the grain question. We cannot recover the national total, but we can see a method for distributing demand across places and time. A distant community did not need to feed all of Giza alone. A royal network could assign a bounded obligation, receive it through an administrative chain, and leave a record when the obligation was incomplete. Movement required another network. Environmental evidence indicates that a western branch of the Nile remained high enough for navigation during the reigns of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, bringing the river system close to the pyramid complexes. Inspector Moreir's logbooks give the human scale of that capacity. His crew carried fine limestone from Tura toward Khufu's pyramid complex by water, following routes, timetables, and royal supervision. Mire's cargo was stone, not a documented grain load, so we should not quietly change it. The log proves that organized water transport could connect a distant production site with Giza. The river study proves navigable access. Together they make the movement of other royal goods plausible without giving us one precise food route, landing place, season, or daily timetable. Grain itself demanded work before milling. Emmer wheat and hulled barley dominate the cereal picture at Giza. The protective husks are useful in storage but laborious in processing. A later storehouse near Giza, in the complex associated with Kent cows, produced an unusually clean sample of emmer and barley with little chaff or weed seed. That building belongs to a later or uncertain phase, not securely to Khufu, and one sample cannot describe every delivery. Still, it offers a valuable possibility. Some slowed to husking and cleaning may have happened upstream, allowing specialized stages to be divided across communities before grain reached its final store. Imagine the representative load only as far as the evidence permits. Producers harvest and prepare cereals somewhere beyond Giza. A district's obligation gathers it into containers. Dispatchers assign a date. Boat crews or animal handlers move it through a mixed network of water and land. We do not know the estate, the price, the precise route, or the individual terms under which each person worked. What we can see is dependence. Meret, at the receiving end, can do nothing until many distant hands have completed their part. The local payoff is not a tonnage. It is a structure. Royal supply could spread demand among regions, schedule responsibility, exploit a navigable river network, and sometimes divide processing before final storage. The load now approaches Giza as more than food. It approaches as an expected and reviewable delivery. The next question is how a bulk arrival became a controlled batch rather than an untraceable heap. We return to the broken clay from the opening, now with a broader chain behind it. Somewhere at the representative receiving threshold, a load arrives. Porters can move it. A storekeeper can direct it. A scribe or responsible official can note it. Yet the most important action may be the one that limits access after arrival. The Royal Administrative Building at Haid El Ghurub contained a concentration of at least 10 mud brick silos. Their protected setting supports the interpretation of substantial central grain storage. The full contents have not survived as a complete series of deposits, and the building belongs to the town's mainly later Fourth Dynasty life. Even so, the arrangement makes an institutional principle visible. Bulk cereal could be gathered under controlled access rather than left exposed beside every bakery. Central storage solves only half the problem. A full silo is useful to no miller until someone authorizes release. This is where ceilings become more than decorative impressions. Wet clay could be pressed over a cord, stopper, door fastening, bag, bin, document, or other closure. An official seal rolled or stamped across it could identify authority or responsibility. Opening the closure broke the clay and created the small fragments that archaeologists now recover. The front impression and the reverse trace answer different questions. The front may connect and act to a royal name, an office, or a seal owner. The back can retain the texture or shape of what the clay touched. Neither face necessarily reveals the commodity. A fragment associated with administration is not automatically a grain receipt, a beer jar, or a personal ration. Its deeper meaning is that access left a material consequence. Haid El Ghurub also preserves raised features or pedestals whose functions have prompted several interpretations. They should remain unresolved here. A good account of storage does not need every platform to become a measuring station or every room to receive a confident label. The silos, walls, access routes, and ceilings already show that the settlement had ways to concentrate goods and make entry accountable. For our disclosed reconstruction, Mored receives a closure that does not match what she expected. Perhaps an impression is damaged, a count differs, or the accompanying information is incomplete. We do not know which ancient circumstance occurred on any particular morning, and we will not call it theft or sabotage. Mored's supported choice is procedural. She pauses the release, compares the available signs, and requests a second check from another responsible person. That pause contains the human pressure of the system without turning it into a crisis. A miller may be ready. A hearth tender may already be arranging fuel. Time spent checking one batch can inconvenience the next task. But careful delay protects earlier labor as well as later workers. Releasing an unverified amount would move uncertainty forward, where it would become harder to locate. Once a batch is accepted, bulk supply can be divided. We do not know the capacity of the measuring container, the daily issue schedule, or the exact office that controlled every release. We can still follow the principle: store much, expose less, identify responsibility, and pass onward only what the next work cycle requires. As storage expanded in the settlement, bakeries also multiplied, a pattern consistent with central grain supporting distributed production. The local answer is therefore controlled access. Storage was not simply a pile waiting in the open. Walls, silos, closures, officials, and repeated checks could transform a regional delivery into a bounded batch. Merit's verified issue now leaves the compound. Ahead are the low turn of a quern, the weight of a bread mold, and the continuing need for fuel. Bread gives us the clearest production rooms in the entire provisioning story. Excavators at Height El Gorav identified purpose-built bakery spaces containing mixing vats, hearths, ash, and settings associated with tall pottery bread molds called bedja. Here, architecture and residue meet. Grain did not simply disappear into an account and reappear as a meal. It passed through rooms shaped for repeated work. The batch released from storage first had to reach people who could prepare it. Depending on its condition, cereal might still need cleaning. Querns reduce grain through repeated pressure and motion. Flour or meal moved to large mixing vessels. Fuel carriers supplied fires. Mold handlers managed pottery near the hearth. Other workers cleared ash, maintained work surfaces, and carried products onward. The exact composition or gender of each team has not been preserved, so it is better to see a chain of supported roles than to stage one fixed crew. The bedja mold makes that chain tactile. Some recovered examples were exceptionally heavy even before filling. They stood near heat, received prepared grain mixtures, and helped shape a portable product. Archaeologists have found very large numbers of bedja fragments across the settlement. A single vessel can break into many sherds, so fragments cannot be translated into loaves. What the abundance does demonstrate is repetition. Pottery was made, used hard, broken, discarded, and replaced again and again. The bakery system appears to have grown not through one enormous oven hall, but through the replication of work units closer to household scale. That is an important piece of ancient engineering. A central store can hold grain in bulk, while several smaller production rooms reduce the risk and complexity of exposing everything at once. A familiar task can be repeated by more teams. If one hearth needs attention, every loaf in the settlement need not depend on a single fire. Scaling by repetition also makes responsibility legible. The storekeeper issues a batch. A miller works that batch. A mixer receives the result. Someone prepares molds and tends the hearth. Another person handles fuel, which had its own supply chain from trees, scrub, charcoal making, transport, and storage. Feeding workers required more than cereal. It required a steady flow of combustible material that the grain accounts alone would not reveal. Modern experiments with recreated bedja molds have helped researchers think about heat and handling. They have not recovered the ancient recipe. In one well-known attempt, approximate equipment produced a loaf the experimenters themselves regarded as heavy and overly sour. That failure is useful. It shows how many variables hide behind an excavated room: grain treatment, water, fermentation, mixture, vessel shape, heat, timing, and practice judgment. The archaeology preserves a workplace more securely than it preserves flavor. We can let Moret's batch enter this room without making her its baker. Her part was to release an accountable amount. The miller's work preserves that choice by keeping the batch distinct enough to process. The bakery team's payoff is material. After grinding, mixing, mold handling, heat, and fuel, portable bread can leave the hearth. No one person creates the result alone. There is a quiet efficiency in this arrangement. Central storage protects bulk grain. Bounded release limits what enters production. Replicated bakery units turn a national supply problem into a series of manageable local tasks. Broken molds and ash show how often those tasks had to be renewed, while the missing recipe reminds us that practical knowledge can vanish even when the room survives. The first preparation question can now be answered in part. Bread was produced in excavated bakery spaces supplied from organized storage, and institutional scale came through many repeated units rather than one implausibly vast kitchen. Beer, fish, and animal foods will require different evidence later. Before we reach them, the checked batch must return to a less visible material, a ledger in which a short delivery could remain present after the missing food was gone. A broken ceiling records the fact that controlled access once existed. A written account can preserve a different kind of absence. In Papyrus H, a short delivery did not simply leave a blank. It could be marked and carried forward as arrears, with red making the discrepancy visible inside the table. The document belongs to the end of Khufu's reign and covers 4 months of provisions for one naval work gang connected with Wadi El Jarf. Columns organize bread, flour, grain, dates, places, dates, and amounts. The alternating delta districts we met earlier appear not as scenery, but as responsible origins. A dispatcher or scribe could compare the expected delivery with the received one, then preserve the remainder as an obligation still open. That is a subtle administrative achievement. Food is perishable and mobile. It can be ground, baked, eaten, spilled, transferred, or consumed by fire. A written shortfall allows the institution to remember a difference after the physical goods have moved on. The record does not tell us why every deficit occurred. It does not reveal an argument, a penalty, a failed harvest, a delayed boat, or a dishonest carrier. Red ink proves reviewable discrepancy, not a dramatic cause. We should also keep the document where archaeology found it. Papyrus H was not recovered from a Giza bakery or the Royal Administrative Building. It supplied one specialized crew at a Red Sea port. Its quantities cannot become a ration scale for the Great Pyramid workforce. We use it here as a contemporary Khufu-era parallel for what royal accounting could record, while Giza's ceilings separately show a landscape of controlled closures and responsible offices. This distinction matters for Moret. She never holds Papyrus H in our reconstruction. She has no knowledge of a document buried at another site, or of conclusions reached by modern scholars. At the Giza threshold, she encounters only a practical mismatch. An expected closure, amount, or delivery does not agree with what can be verified. Her choice remains observable. She pauses. She asks for the count or closure to be checked again. She reports what is available rather than inventing the missing amount. If an authorized batch can proceed, she releases only the supported portion. The unresolved difference remains attached to the next responsible handoff instead of being hidden inside production. This is not a recovered incident. No Giza text joins one damaged seal, one delayed jar, one bakery batch, and one administrator on one morning. The reconstruction is supported because its individual actions fit the surviving nodes, accountable closures, storage, production dependencies, officials, and a real Khufu-era account in which deficits became arrears. Its limit is equally important. We cannot name the cause or the human consequence. The kitchen need not become a place of panic for the system to feel human. A miller can wait. A hearth can be tended more slowly. A second official can take time to compare a closure. Mirette's quiet pressure comes from protecting other people's finished work. If she passes uncertainty forward carelessly, the error becomes harder to locate. If she pauses and records it, the next person receives a clearer task. The third opening question can now settle. Who counted rations is not answered by one recovered biography, but responsible roles are visible: scribes, dispatchers, inspectors, seal owners, receivers, and storekeepers. What survives is divided among materials. A ceiling made access accountable. A ledger made origin, date, amount, and shortfall reviewable. Neither gives us a modern payroll, an individual ration card, or a complete Giza daybook. The fourth question also has a bounded answer. When something expected was missing, at least one royal account could carry the deficit forward. Mirette's pause and recheck show a plausible local response, openly labeled as reconstruction. There is no theft, punishment, or hungry crowd hidden in the red mar. There is only unfinished responsibility, passed to someone who can see that it remains unfinished. The verified batch can now continue toward its recipients. To distribute food among thousands, the administration did not need to count the entire pyramid workforce at one counter. It needed groups that could receive responsibility at a scale small enough to manage. Large institutions become workable when they are divided into units that can be named. The Old Kingdom evidence preserves royal crews with identities and subdivisions. Inspector Mera's group is one Khufu-era example documented in papyri. Crew graffiti associated with Menkaure provides a later Giza comparison. The long galleries at Hayt el-Garab may have accommodated organized groups, although their capacity and exclusive use are not settled. These sources do not describe one uniform organization across every reign. A crew serving at a Red Sea port, a group moving stone, and people attached to a later pyramid complex may differ in size, duty, rotation, origin, and legal status. Yet they share a practical principle. Work and supply could be addressed to a group rather than to an uncounted mass. Imagine the distribution point without modern ration cards or a row of identical portions. A checked batch reaches a responsible recipient attached to a crew or work unit. The group can be subdivided. A list, title, seal, or known office makes the handoff reviewable. Bread may be passed onward in portable form. Other commodities can follow through their own containers and schedules. The evidence does not require every food to arrive in one room at 1 hour. Mirette completes her part when a verified allocation leaves controlled custody and reaches an organized group. Her local relief is restrained. The next work unit can begin or continue. This does not mean that every resident of Giza has received an equal breakfast, or that the same foods reached managers, craft workers, rotating crews, households, and temple personnel in identical forms. We can now assemble the main mechanism promised at the beginning. Communities beyond Giza produced grain and other goods. Royal obligations and dispatches turned part of that production into scheduled supply. Boats, animal handlers, and overland carriers moved loads through a connected landscape. Receivers and seal owners made arrival and access accountable. Protected stores concentrated bulk goods. Bounded releases sent cereal to millers, fuel handlers, mixers, mold workers, and bakers. Scribes and accounts kept origins, dates, amounts, and shortfalls visible. Organized crews made group allocation repeatable. The sustainable answer is a chain, not a menu. No single link had to hold the whole pyramid's appetite in mind. Each row needed to complete a smaller responsibility and make the next one possible. The system could expand through more districts, more deliveries, more stores, more bakery units, and more organized groups, while still depending on ordinary checks at every handoff. This also explains why one missing denominator does not erase the story. We cannot calculate a safe daily grain total because the workforce, ration, frequency, and menu are not fixed. We can still see the architecture required for recurring provisioning. Its proof lies in towns and waterways, silos and bakeries, ceilings and accounts, named crews and discarded remains. These pieces reinforce one another without becoming one perfect ledger. The opening grain question is therefore substantially answered. A large recurring flow had to arrive, but its amount cannot be recovered as one number. The stronger conclusion is that supply was distributed across regions and time, then reduced into controlled batches and group-scale allocations. Repetition, accountability, and subdivision allowed the system to function without one person counting every mouth at dawn. From here, the journey can become slower. The central chain has reached its recipient. What remains will deepen the simple phrase often used to describe Egyptian labor provisioning: bread and beer. Bread has given us rooms, ash, molds, and hearths. Beer gives us accounts and vessels, but the expected production room is strangely difficult to find. Beer belonged to near the center of Egyptian royal provisioning, and the Wadi el-Jarf accounts show that Khufu's administration supplied beer to some royal crews. That statement is secure within its context. It does not tell us that every person at Giza received the same daily amount or where all of the settlement's beer was made. At Hayt el-Ghurab, pottery types conventionally called beer jars are common. The name can mislead if it is treated like a chemical test. Ceramic form tells archaeologists about manufacturing traditions and likely uses, but vessels were reused. Examples of the same broad type could carry liquids, pigments, gypsum, copper-related material, or other contents. A jar shape is evidence. It is not the vanished substance itself. The architectural contrast is even more revealing. Excavators could point to bakeries with vats, hearths, ash, and beige settings. In a published field report after more than 20 years of work at the settlement, they still could not identify a bona fide brewery with comparable confidence. That negative result does not mean beer was absent. It means the production location remained open. Brewing may have occurred in an unexcavated area, in spaces not recognized as breweries elsewhere in the supply network, or through arrangements that left a different trace. A beautiful later object can help explain why caution is necessary. The Metropolitan Museum of Art holds a model bakery and brewery from the tomb of Menkaure. Tiny workers crush grain, grind it, tend vessels, and carry out linked tasks. The model dates to the early 12th dynasty at Thebes, more than 5 centuries after Khufu. It is a useful picture of a later Egyptian process, not a window opened directly onto Fourth Dynasty Giza. Muret may receive or release a vessel in our representative route, but neither she nor the narrator can declare its contents from type alone. The disciplined choice is to keep the jar closed in language. Its form is known. Its particular cargo is not. The beer question therefore ends with a satisfying absence. Beer was real in Khufu-era royal crew supply. Vessels associated with it were common at Giza. Yet the settlement has not yielded a brewery as secure as its bakeries in the evidence used here. A missing room is not a failure of the story. It shows the difference between expecting a process and actually locating it. Other foods leave a more direct but equally selective trail. Animal and fish bones survive in large quantities, though most fragments resist precise identification. Their pattern can reveal supply and unequal access, provided we do not turn every shard of bone into a serving. The scale of the animal remains is impressive. ARA researchers reported examining more than 175,000 bones and fragments from Hayt el-Ghurab. Yet only about 1/10 could be identified at least to genus. That denominator should remain beside every statement that follows. The rift use is abundant, but most of it cannot be named precisely enough to build a detailed menu. Among the identifiable domestic mammals, cattle and sheep or goats dominate the broad pattern, while pigs are less frequent overall. Age and sex profiles add another layer. A surplus of young male cattle in caprines fits a system in which producing communities kept many breeding females and sent expendable young males toward a large consumer center. This is a provisioning model grounded in herd logic, not a surviving shipment docket. Local husbandry could still exist, and the route of any one herd remains unknown. Different animals also move differently. Cattle and sheep or goats can travel over distance under handlers. Pigs are less suited to long drives and may fit more local household management. This contrast helps explain how a centrally supplied town could still contain smaller domestic food practices. Institutional provision and household activity were not mutually exclusive. Spatial patterning warns against equal bowls. Large residences, smaller households, gallery areas, administrative compounds, and temple settings produced different animal assemblages. At the Menkaura Valley Temple, a later context than Khufu, cattle remains and selected for them portions reflect institutional and ritual choices. Those remains cannot be averaged into an ordinary worker's breakfast. They show that status and purpose could redirect particular foods. This adds another route. Comparative skeletons allow zooarchaeologists to identify species from surviving elements, including Nile perch and Nile catfish in the Giza evidence. The end Khufu accounts at Wadi el-Jaf also list dried fish for royal teams. The two observations should remain separate. Fish was present at Giza, and dried fish could travel through a Khufu-era supply system, but neither fact proves that all Giza fish arrived dried, or that every worker received the same species and portion. The archaeological process itself is a handoff. An animal is raised, moved, processed, consumed, and discarded. Much later, a fragment is excavated, washed, sorted, and compared with a reference collection. Only then may it be identified by element and species. Each stage removes some information and preserves another. A bone can tell us more securely what animal was present than who ate it, how it was cooked, or whether it appeared every day. Moret's representative allocation therefore remains unequal by design, though we cannot reconstruct its rulebook. She may direct different goods toward different institutional recipients because patterned access is supported. We cannot place prime beef in every bowl, assign a fish portion to each crew member, or describe a universal entitlement. Her task is to keep goods accountable within a hierarchy whose exact portions have not survived. The food repertoire is now broader than the familiar pair of bread and beer. Cattle, caprines, pigs, birds, and fish entered the Giza record in different ways. Some animals fit regional collection. Some practices were local. Some foods gathered around higher status or ritual spaces. The local payoff is substantial supply without equality. Animal and fish foods were real, but their distribution varied by place, institution, and status. This finding changes the human question. If food was abundant enough to leave immense refuse, can the bodies of people at Giza tell us whether the system made them healthy or well cared for? The answer asks for a gentler tone and an even firmer limit. Human remains deserve distance and respect. They were people before they became evidence, and their bones do not exist merely to confirm a story about food. Studies of Old Kingdom Giza cemeteries can reveal patterns of activity and healing, but they cannot securely identify every individual as a worker on Khufu's pyramid. Changes where muscles and tendons attached to bone vary among social groups in the Giza samples. They're consistent with substantial physical activity and different life patterns. Such changes have many causes, including age, body size, movement, health, and repeated load. They cannot tell us that one person hauled stone, baked bread, rowed a boat, or received a particular ration. A separate study examined 204 adults and 2,287 long bones, identifying 45 fractures. Most of those observed fractures had healed in good alignment. That pattern is consistent with at least some injured people receiving stabilization, practical care, and time for bone to knit. It is a meaningful trace of recovery. It is not a certificate for universal health care. The sample spans a broad Old Kingdom period and varied cemetery identities. People who survived long enough to heal are more visible than those who did not. Good alignment does not identify a hospital, a professional title, paid leave, or equal access. It also does not prove that a nutritionally complete diet caused the healing. This is where a tempting chain must be broken. Animal bone can show that meat and fish entered the settlement. Human bone can show activity and some successful healing. Joining the two does not prove that every laborer ate well and received comprehensive care. Archaeological trust depends on resisting conclusions that feel humane but exceed the evidence. Merit leaves no body that can be securely called hers. Her possible echo is smaller. A provisioning system capable of recurring supply may have helped create the conditions in which some people could rest and recover, but that remains a possibility rather than a diagnosis. We do not need to invent her injury, her family, or her fate to recognize the human value of dependable food and careful work. The local answer is balanced. Bodies from Giza preserve strenuous activity, social difference, fractures, and successful healing. They do not reveal one occupation, one diet, or universal care. The evidence gives us people who labored and, in some cases, had time to mend. It leaves their complete lives quiet. Every one of those lives also depended on the most ordinary commodity in the settlement. Grain, beer, animals, and fish can all be traced through stores, vessels, or refuse. Water was indispensable, yet the principal storage solution at Hayt el Ghurab has not been found. The nearby Nile branch changes how we picture Giza. During the main pyramid building reigns, a navigable channel brought the river network close enough to support heavy transport. Morer's limestone journeys show what trained crews, boats, timetables, and supervision could accomplish in Khufu's reign. But transport water and drinking water are not the same historical answer. A boat route can deliver stone near a monument without telling us how water reached a bakery vat, an animal enclosure, a household, or a crew farther inside the settlement. Potable water still had to be lifted, carried, stored, protected, and distributed. Seasonal levels mattered. Containers mattered. Distance within the town mattered. None of those daily quantities or schedules survives as a complete record. Excavators have not identified a large formal water storage area at Hayt el Ghurab, comparable in clarity to the silo concentration. This is a genuine gap. It does not mean the settlement lacked water. Smaller containers, perishable systems, nearby channels, unexcavated spaces, or repeated delivery could have met the need. The absence tells us that the most important daily commodity can leave one of the least satisfying architectural signatures. Grain and water also enter the archaeological record differently. Grain held in a mud brick silo can leave a fixed room, charred seeds, processing waste, and grinding tools around it. Water may be poured, absorbed, carried away in reused jars, or moved through equipment that decays. Constant circulation can scatter the evidence instead of concentrating it. This does not identify the missing solution, but it explains why the absence of one monumental tank is not evidence that daily distribution was casual or easy. Several places south or east of the settlement have been described with possible functions such as harbor, lagoon, delivery zone, or livestock corral. Current excavation tests those ideas rather than simply confirming them. No ground is not automatically a dock. An enclosure is not automatically a cattle pen. A responsible reconstruction keeps those labels provisional until soil, architecture, fines, and environmental evidence agree. For an eyes-closed journey, we can still follow generic labor without choosing a false route. A carrier fills a jar at an available source. Weight moves from ground to shoulder or carrying frame. The container travels inward. Another person receives it near a work area. The action is ordinary enough to be nearly invisible in monumental history, but repeating it across a dense settlement would have required substantial effort. Merit checks that water is available for the representative production cycle because mixing grain, supporting people, and managing work all require it. We do not number the jars. We do not invent a reservoir or pipe. We do not name the source, hour, or carrier as if a roster survived. Her check simply keeps the dependency visible. Water therefore gives us a different kind of local payoff. Access was plausible because the river network approached Giza and transport expertise was real. Daily distribution inside the settlement remained laborious. The large storage solution, if there was one, has not been securely identified. A missing tank can teach as much as a found silo when the absence is allowed to remain open. The practical chain is now complete enough to run once from beginning to end. We have also learned which links are direct excavation, which belong to a Khufu era parallel, which come from a later analogy, and which must remain representative reconstruction. Let us return before dawn to the small clay closure from the opening and follow one final handoff. The final morning is not a recovered day. No papyrus lists these exact people in these exact rooms, and no ceiling ties one named container to one bakery batch and one crew. We assemble the sequence because each node has evidence, while keeping the bridge between nodes clearly marked as representative. A load approaches the settlement after many earlier hands have completed their work. Regional production and royal obligation are supported by accounts and network archaeology. Movement through the river landscape is supported by environmental evidence and documented royal transport, though this food cargo's route is unknown. At the threshold, an official closure makes access accountable. The particular fragment does not identify its contents. Meret receives the load as a composite guide, not a historical official. Any impression, count, or expected amount does not agree with what can be verified. She does not accuse anyone. She pauses the transfer, asks for another check, and reports the supported amount. The unresolved difference remains visible rather than being disguised inside the next batch. Papyrus H's red arrears show that a Khufu-era royal account could preserve this kind of unfinished obligation, but that papyrus stays at Wadi el-Jawf and out of her hands. Within the protected compound, bulk cereal can enter storage. The silo concentration is excavated at the mainly later Fourth Dynasty town. Its connection to this representative morning is a system comparison. A bounded issue leaves controlled custody. The amount is deliberately unnumbered. It reaches a miller because corns and cereal remain support that work. It reaches a bakery because vats, hearth, hash, and beja settings preserve repeated production roams. Responsibility passes through tools. The kern turns grain into meal. The mixing vessel receives it. Fuel reaches a hearth through a separate supply chain. Molds are handled, heated, used, broken, and replaced. Replicated work units scale the task without requiring one giant oven. The ancient recipe remains unknown, but the organization of labor becomes visible in the room. Other food streams join without forming one universal meal. Beer is supported in Khufu-era royal provision accounts, while its Giza production place remains unresolved. Animal profiles fit regional supply as well as local practice, and neighborhood patterns show unequal access. Fish bones confirm fish at Giza. Dried fish in the Wadi accounts confirms a transportable form elsewhere. Water arrives through labor whose route and quantity are unknown. At a distribution point, an organized group can receive a checked allocation. Named crews and subdivisions show that royal labor could be arranged below the scale of the whole project. Merit's batch reaches a recipient who can carry responsibility farther. The local success is modest. One supported allocation proceeds. It does not certify that every person in the town has eaten the same food. Consumption changes evidence again. Bread leaves molds. Liquid leaves vessels. Fuel becomes ash. Grain may char. Pottery breaks. Plant remains and bone enter floors, pits, dumps, and fills. Most daily material disappears completely. What survives is filtered by burning, disposal, soil, later building, excavation area, sampling, and the questions researchers know how to ask. Centuries pass, and the handoff reverses. An excavator records a wall, a floor, a silo, or a bakery before lifting objects from context. A sealing specialist studies the official impression on one side and the closure trace on the other. A botanist sorts charred seeds from sediment. A faunal analyst compares a fragment with known skeletons. The papyrologist reconstructs damaged columns without pretending that missing edges are present. These modern workers do not restore the lost morning. They preserve the relationships that can still be tested. A sealing speaks about accountable closure. A silo speaks about concentrated storage. A bakery speaks about repeated transformation. A ledger speaks about origins, dates, amounts, and arrears for one crew. Bone speaks about animals, activity, or healing within carefully defined samples. No one class of evidence carries the entire story. That is why the Great Pyramid workforce was not fed by one miraculous food or one all-seeing administrator. Recurring provision depended on ordinary responsibilities distributed across a wide network. Someone produced, someone dispatched, someone transported, someone received, someone checked, someone stored, released, ground, carried fuel, baked, allocated, and cleaned. Each finished task made another task possible. Merit can now recede from the root. She was never hidden in the clay. Her value was to keep our attention on the moment when a system becomes human. One person decides whether the next handoff is clear enough to proceed. Her final trace is not a biography. It is the supported batch moving onward, and the unresolved difference remaining visible. The 4 opening questions have found their proper scale. No exact daily grain total survives, but scheduled regional supply, transport, storage, and repeated production are visible. Bread has secure rooms, beer has records and vessels, but no equally secure local brewery. Counters survive as rolls, ceilings, and accounts rather than complete personal stories. A missing delivery could become an arrear, while a particular response at Giza remains reconstruction. And now the explanation can grow lighter. Picture the small ceiling fragment once more, resting beside a few charred grains and a patch of cool ash. The official impression is incomplete. The closure it once guarded has gone. Nothing in the clay tells us the full name of the hand that pressed it, or the contents that waited beyond it. Nearby, the quern is still. The hearth is settled. A mold, once heavy with repeated use, has broken into pieces that no longer resemble a loaf. The crew has moved beyond the edge of the picture, carrying its work into a day we cannot follow. What remains is not emptiness. It is a quiet pattern of care. A load was accepted. A difference was noticed. Grain was protected, transformed, and passed onward. Responsibility moved from one pair of hands to another, each person holding only a small part of an immense undertaking. The distant pyramid keeps the names of kings. The lower ground keeps other traces: clay, grain, ash, pottery, bone, and the shapes of working rooms. In those smaller things, ordinary competence is still present without needing to be loud. You do not need to hold a whole chain now. Let the river become only a dark, slow line beyond the settlement. Let the storehouse door rest closed. Let the final warmth leave the hearth. The last greens lie quiet beside the broken